And welcome to Bourbon and Bytes. Thank you to our guest, Wendy Thomas, for being gracious enough to join us. For those of you who may not know Wendy Thomas, and I think you'd have to be living under a rock not to know Wendy Thomas, one of the very few CEOs in tech who are female. That is not, of course, something in and of itself, but the fact is you are in a very, very rarefied era of being a CEO for one of the most prominent tech companies that was out there and part of the Dell Technologies family group. And it's wonderful to have you. I've been blessed to have known Wendy now for almost 10 years. I guess about 8 to 10 years. And it's been a wonderful experience, both as a friendship and a mentor role. So thank you very, very much, Wendy, for being on here and being gracious enough to give us your time. And so, to kick it off, you just sort of handed off the reins of Secureworks and the acquisition with Sophos. So tell the audience what you're up to now.
Sure. So I did hand the reins to a very capable CEO and Joe Levy with Sophos, who I've known for some years, and absolutely in great hands, both in terms of our team and our customers. So I have taken a little time in the last few months and really spent a lot of time connecting with family and friends that, as you know, in a full-time gig can be hard to do. And I'm just thrilled that they still want to spend time with me after all those years, and doing some board work, which I find really rewarding and interesting to see inside of other businesses, and to bring some cybersecurity and technology perspective to those boards. So it's been a great few months.
For those that may not be familiar with sort of the nuanced difference between being part of that C-suite and then being part of the board, what's the sort of the biggest difference that you've experienced being a board member versus part of that C-suite who's also on the board?
Well, and I've been serving on public company boards, and as you know, Secureworks was public until the recent acquisition. And the catchphrase is that the board is in a governance and advisory role and not an operating role. But boards are usually made up of very accomplished operators, and so finding the right line between providing timely and focused advisory comments and questions versus stepping over the line into being directive in areas that you shouldn't, right? That the management team should take on. That's really the key thing to find. And having been on the other side of that as the operating team, I now really appreciate how good our board at Secureworks was at choosing their moments for advice, access to resources, well-worded questions. And so I try to really mirror what I learned from them of the right things at the right time. Sometimes is, let the management team proceed down a path before you really jump in there. And sometimes it's to provide a resource that they may not have access to get a little outside-in perspective that's not necessarily directive.
Are you able to talk about the companies for which you are a board member at the moment, or is that sort of confidential?
Yes, no, absolutely. It's public, and so I have been on the board of IonQ, which is a quantum computing company, for the last several years. It was highly aligned in my perspective to my CEO role at Secureworks, where the implications, both as you know, I like to say, the power and the peril of quantum for cyber is pretty high. Of course, we can talk about that. But recently rolled off of that to join a fintech board out in California called Marqeta. And they're really a modern issuing platform that has flexibility that no other player in the market has, and the chance to really help them take what I think is a great asset and leverage that, how they say, build once, sell many times, to leverage that into some new areas.
That's great. I kind of wanted to focus in on two hot topics that have been sort of pressing in on me of late. I've been asked to comment on it several times, and I'd like to put you on the hot seat a bit. So I don't know if you saw the commercial. I did a little cyber minute about this last week, and it was by Liquid Death, which is sort of a water company. They do canned water, and
Highly
their spiel
caffeinated.
is, yeah, exactly. They kill your thirst, right? So it's Liquid Death, but they created a commercial entirely with AI. And if you did not pay really, really, really minute detail, you would not know that it was an AI driven commercial, meaning it is from end to end storyline. Everything was an AI generated content. It took less time to make it than it does to watch it, and they produced it. And so the implication was, look, there's no actors, no set designers, no cameramen, no sound people. There's no post production. Literally, they obliterated every job that was required for making a traditional commercial. And the consequence of that for me, like literally, it's a sort of death knell to an industry. And I feel that death knell coming for a lot in the cybersecurity space. And the reason I say that is I used to like encourage young people who wanted to get into the things that I did and I gave them a list of things you should go learn and go do. And the reality is software is doing 90% of that now. There is no frontline intrusion analysis anymore. And, I mean, even with platforms like Taegis, et cetera, they're taking that work away from people. And so I just wanted to get your take. Do you feel that sense? I know there's, it's a double-edged sword, as with quantum. AI is the same way. But what's your take? What does it mean for not only cybersecurity, but sort of industry in general?
Sure. So guess what? Change is here and change is here to stay. I do, at the risk of sort of playing it down, I do think that this generation of AI and large language models and the emergence of quantum computing that can solve really different, more complex, nonlinear problems is step function. But we've been on a change curve for quite some time, even over the last 25 years in cyber, outside of cyber. And so, as you know, the economist in me likes to put things in perspective. So there is an inflection point of the kinds of jobs that are going to be different. But if you look back, right, and just go back to this century, like 2000, you had in our space, you kind of mentioned it, the jobs were really Linux and, Windows admin focused, perimeter type defense, firewalls, IDS, IPS. Cybersecurity roles really were just part of an IT job. There was no kind of standalone security team. And, I know my parents still didn't know what the heck I was doing when I first joined Secureworks in 2008. What are you talking about security? What do we need that for? And then, in the 2010s, you start to see the emergence of endpoint, if you will, and specialized malware and roles that really started to focus on that as breaches grew in prominence and regulatory scrutiny came into place. And it was the first time you started to see security specific rather than just technology specific certifications and degrees. And so then you get threat intelligence analysts and pen testers and cloud security specialists, compliance, risk management type folks. And so the question is, and that continued to OT and IoT. So what does that mean for this next generation, and how do we sort of create resilience to, we're going to do this again in however many years, and maybe instead of being 10 years, it's 3
Months.
years.
Yeah.
There's tremendous opportunity for AI security engineers and AI network, configuration folks. How do you do forensics on an AI model that's opaque? Right. So I think the opportunity for all of us to just think about what's that next problem in security, because there will be one, because there's a bad guy on the other side. How do we translate that into the programming, AI query, quantum cryptography knowledge that translates into an interesting career in cyber? Because it's going to be there.
It is. I think that personally, I think we're going to see almost a stratification. I think that there will be a need for folks who operate at a much higher level at data science and mathematics, and are able to help contribute to models and decompose models, et cetera, and train models. I also think there's probably a higher order for the human intelligence piece, right? What does threat tradecraft look like in this new environment?
Right.
But I also think there's going to be a resurgence in skilled trades. Data centers will always need HVAC, plumbing, electrical. They will need new distribution, new design. So there's a compendium of jobs that I think have been marginalized over the last 20 or 30 years, where everyone, had to go get a higher order degree to be successful. And we sort of malign these other skilled trades. But like, you want to talk about a quantum or AI, resilient job. The skilled trades, well, unless Tesla builds, electrical robots or electrician robots or HVAC robots, we still have, I think a suite of skilled trades that are targeting towards supporting these new environments, these new infrastructures, is something I've also been encouraging people to explore. Is like, it's not. There's nothing wrong with looking at how even AI affects those jobs, but how you can support those ecosystems as well in the skilled
Yeah, even
trades.
just look at the billions of dollars of infrastructure announcements, I think
Yeah.
today or yesterday, to support, these AI data centers. And the same is true in the quantum space. I mean, it's a lot of physical provisioning that's required to support all of this data. So absolutely, there's a role for everyone. It's just got a new title to it.
Yeah. I also think that there's probably a window of opportunity, and I know that everyone's sort of jumping on the bandwagon of how you leverage AI in your current position. But I use AI models, and you have more than most a very intimate and firsthand knowledge of how supervised and unsupervised machine learning can contribute to new ways of doing business. And so when you look at not only your experiences with Secureworks and building the Taegis platform, which by the way was in some respects evolutionary, in some respects revolutionary when it comes to looking at the way we were doing business prior, and then towards as you look to IonQ and some of the quantum capabilities. When you look at sort of that evolution of technology and you look at quantum, I actually had a conversation with another friend who's at IBM, and they're looking at quantum resilience and technologies. Like, what does that mean mathematically and cryptologically? So having said all that, with that sort of intimate view, how do you feel the next 36 months to 48 months is going to shape up for that environment?
I think these new large language models in particular solve some of the things that even we hadn't originally solved with a data science, ML type approach in the Tejas platform. It was always built to be designed for the data problem of security. What's interesting about that model, of course, is we had 6 petabytes of data. So, right, a lot of data to train the model. We'd been in the space for 20 years, but there was a process and an ongoing process to label that data, to be able to kind of normalize across that, to run detection and or response automations across different types of data sets. And what you see now is the power of this next generation to really handle unstructured data, to label that data for you and really reason about how it should be labeled and even go back and learn and that kind of thing. So it makes more data usable or useful, if you will, and it has the ability to reason more quickly about it in a way that then comes back to a human that doesn't necessarily have to be a cyber expert now with these large language models properly trained. So it kind of democratizes security expertise as well, or at least your ability to action things. And that's where I think that it's really, there's a whole lot going on, but those two in particular, I think, are both exciting and step function different than when we started building Taegis, 8 years ago.
Yeah, it was interesting. One of the debates with agentic AI, meaning the long-term autonomous, semi-autonomous models that we put in place for managing Longer term problems or more systemic problems, I mean, or larger reaction times. And it was interesting because what I've observed in sort of reading the literature is that it is in these models build upon themselves with learned. The neural nets are all learning from the underlying decisions that we're making, and they're small in their binary sort of equations, but in the prioritization of how that model learns, you get unintended consequences the longer this goes out. It's sort of like, that deviation of looking at a map. If I shoot my azimuth and then over time I'm drifting way, way, way over here, but not knowing it. And with agentic models, I use the example in healthcare, for example. So if cost was my number one priority and then patient outcome was number two, there may not be any immediate consequence of that, but over time, what we may find is that in the model as it learns over time is that cost is the primary driver, and if human outcomes are secondary to that, what are the implications of that for healthcare decisions long term? And I know that's kind of a hyperbole, but there does become significant questions. The longer and more autonomous systems are, the more that the decisions that you made early on in those models matter. And undoing them becomes really, really hard later because the amount of data, the amount of subordinate decisions that get made. So how do you think is there another methodology or another kind of angle on that we need to consider when we're looking at some of the longer term AI models?
Well, I'm afraid humans have been just as good at doing filing risk upon risk. I mean, let's look at collateralized mortgage obligations in the 2008 financial crisis, right? Humans did that.
Yeah.
But
That's a very good point.
What's different about that is that it seemed opaque, but in reality, from a forensic perspective, you think about an incident response, and how do you go back and see if there's risk and or to prevent it and or go back and figure out what happened so you can fix it going forward. The opacity of these models, and it's not just the large amount of data, but the reasoning that's happening that's not captured, right? It's not stored somewhere where you just pull it back up and forensically see what happened. I think the combination of those two is why one of the key roles in the future is that that AI forensic specialization, and then clearly that's going to involve tools and people to design that. But if you think about some of the AI tools today that are, for example, getting up into the CI/CD pipeline, of software before it's deployed, it's almost, for security purposes, configuration, etc. It's almost like that, where we need to have some type of technology that goes into the model itself that is not waiting to the end to bolt on and say, oh my gosh, this outcome was terrible, but really integrate it all along the process to make sure we're staying within certain guardrails. And that higher order people work, as you say, is about setting those guardrails and constantly monitoring and looking through those guardrails to make sure that we don't end up with the crisis at the end.
That is an excellent point. And it's sort of like Vince Cerf, when asked, what he, looking back on his role in developing, what is now the modern internet, he's like, I wish I'd thought of security, right? And it's like, here we are running to build these models that the singularity, like I think, is it Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of talking about like, hey, there's a somewhat of a consensus saying, look, we got about 6 years to like do something before it's too late to do anything. And
right.
And so the question is, do we? I always hate to point to legislation, but if you looked at the UK with their AI tagging legislation, like you have laws that say I must tag, the generation of data or production from AI. I think that's wise at a minimum. I think we do need to bake in some security and self-correction and forensic capability in the models, but I also think we're going to have to act sooner than later with some ability to tag what is information coming from, objective reality versus that which is generated at AI.
Yeah, that synthetic content kind of detection or provenance labeling, it's a really big deal, especially when you start talking about video, deepfake images, that kind of thing. It's kind of fundamental to society.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, you think about it. I mean, not only just from a former CEO, you were publicly traded. There is enough video and voice of you to have done a very, very, very good deep fake where you could have gone on there and just, plowed any number of, relationships or public, interest that you have being in that prominent position and being on a publicly traded company.
Well, I tell you what, our swag team, which is our adversarial testing team, this is probably almost 2 years ago now, did just that
Oh,
to
really?
teach the company about how powerful these tools were. So they bought a tool off the internet. I think they spent like $10 and scraped all the videos of me and basically did a video of me praising them for what a great job they had done and that they should all take a week of compensatory vacation for a job well done. And at the time, the eyes were a little off and all those kinds of things, but it was so easy. The way you started this, it was so quick and easy to produce, and that was almost 2 years ago. That now the ability to sort of detect it with a human eye is
It's
almost completely gone.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I use that example of the Liquid Death commercial. I mean, if you looked at sort of the AI deep fakes 2 years ago, you're right. You could see a delay. Not, it wasn't quite right, or you had people turning the head, and could it fully map your head, et cetera. And those were kind of giveaways. Those don't exist anymore, and they're getting harder and harder to detect as the models get better and better. And I think it's the challenge for me is it's not even Moore's law. I mean, we're not talking 18 months in iteration. This is weeks that things get better and better and better, and the models improve upon themselves. So I do think that it is incumbent upon our community, in particular, those who are more familiar with its applications and uses and constructs, need to be helping our legislature get in front of this, or at least closely behind, meaning make a decision that would be informed and helpful in industry and in reducing the damages, than waiting till after the damage is done and trying to do sort of the tombstone agency of like.
Yeah, the congressional hearing, it doesn't really help. And I,
Right.
me and my funny little phrase, I think that the way that we regulate, really monitor, and frankly create collaboration in kind of the private public sector around these things is that the pace of change is so fast, it has to become a lifestyle, not a project, right? It's not do a big bill, have a hearing if somebody's doing it, and do sort of manual review and enforcement. That is just not possible. And so this idea of really being able to leverage technology in the space, but also collaborating with the legislative arms of our various, local, state, and federal governments to set the rails that then we can use technology to monitor and enforce is, I mean, is the only way it's going to work, because the way we've operated to date is just simply too slow.
I would agree. Pivoting a little bit, this sort of marries the finance and sort of cybercrime. I did a little blog and I was pulling together statistics, and I saw a number that truly staggered me. I think it was CSO Magazine. Someone had referenced that we're looking at $10.5 trillion in transfer of wealth in cybercrime by next year, which is the largest transfer of human wealth in human history. And so the ability for law enforcement to do anything about it is very, very reactive, very small. And because of the areas these folks operate in, it's difficult to do anything about it. But as you look at sort of the financial implications, the amount of transfer of wealth that's going on, and what it really is doing to industry. Are you tracking anything in the realm of higher corporate finance? I know insurance is a big topic, but of how do we effectively address this? Because I mean, what we're doing isn't working, and we have the same conversation every time we get together. So what are you seeing from the corporate board as far as the fiduciary responsibilities towards cybercrime or
Excuse me.
reaction thereof?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've read that same statistic, and one of the things that's most interesting to me, and I'll answer your question in a second, is the drug trade, the global drug trade, 800 billion. So not even 1 trillion, let alone 10 trillion.
Yeah.
And yet this is such a hidden crime because a lot of companies and individuals, they don't want to report it. It's hard to separate the the sort of the rents that the criminal actors extract versus the impact to business of lost sales, brand, downtime, etc. But you're right. We keep having the same conversation because they're like water around the rock. They keep finding that next thing, and so there is only the mission-driven people leveraging innovative technology to go after the bad guy, but also this idea of breaking the economic model. Like fundamentally, that's the answer. You have to break at least for the cyber criminal element, the getting rich from this in ways that are too easy. And part of that, of course, is the cryptocurrency trade and the anonymity that creates, the difficulty of pursuit. So I think you have to look holistically of how is it that they make money, right? This is how you run a business. What do customers buy? What are they willing to pay for? And turn that image on to that market, and think about this in a slightly different way in terms of then the resources that we're willing to invest from a law enforcement preventative technology perspective to and people, right, to break that model.
Yeah, I said flippantly, and I don't know if I'm actually being flippant or I'm being serious, but I'm just couching it in snide humor. But it'd be interesting if we just turned it into the global war on terror. If you put a JDAM or a predator over someone's home, would they be as inclined to to conduct cybercrime? Because we often know who they are, you just can't get to them, right? So,
Yes.
would we change the dynamic if this was considered a clear and present danger to the U.S.? Which, honestly, in terms of financial impact, but in lives, I mean,
Oh,
people don't
yes.
understand how disruptive this is to someone's, like, if you lose your job to this kind of nonsense, or you lose your position. I
Your
mean,
pension, your life saving. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
it's horrific. I do think it's high time we started treating it more than just a simple crime problem, because the implications are geopolitical, they're global, and highly disruptive to society. I just don't think we talk about it enough.
Yeah, it frankly can undermine the pinnings of democracy. To your point,
Mhm.
I think it is elevated to kind of warlike footing. The challenge is this is a marathon, not a 5K. It's
Yeah.
not like a war. You go in and you have certain very clear objectives, and you win and extract. It is a much different kind of long term sustained fights because both sides are going to evolve.
Well, it is, and I've said, because that there's a reason that the cybercrime groups operate in the regions of the world they do. It's illicit gain, but you're moving trillions of dollars into economic areas that don't get that level of influx any other way. So it's very hard to convince someone whose economy is being propped up by this that it's necessarily a bad thing. Especially if your targets are considered, the evil by some other standard. I mean,
Or
it's,
there's a symbiotic relationship,
yeah,
right?
exactly. So I don't know if we'll be able to solve that in a clear, but I do think it's time that we elevate this problem. I do think we probably need to look at sort of the Sarbanes-Oxley of cyber. I know the DoD, and that we're involved in the cyber maturity model certification program to a great degree, and I think it's a good start. The Fed standing up to say, look, you all have been attesting you've been doing this. Every time you signed a DoD contract, you've been saying you're protecting our data. Now prove it. And oh, by the way, there's an attestation that C-level folks have to sign, just like Sarbanes-Oxley. And I'm wondering, for publicly traded companies, I know SEC is nibbling around it, but do you see what are the pros and cons in your mind of sort of having corporate entities have to sort of stand up and make attestations that they are doing the right thing by the protection of their data?
Look, I always think it's good to provide standards that are sort of the collective, here's best practice approach, and for there to be skin in the game for those who are responsible for those assets in learning and adhering to those standards. I think it's tough in a world where private assets are becoming the norm over public assets, right? We've moved into a space of many more investments that are quote, unregulated and therefore not necessarily subject to those types of standards. You get out of government, you get out of public companies, and there's this fast growing sector that doesn't fall under either one of those. So we have to think through those implications. But I have always had this sort of challenge balancing between victimizing the victims because you can get your hands on them
Right.
versus the perpetrators who are harder to get your hands on. I think we've seen in the last 4 years or so our ability to get our hands on folks who are in, geographic locations that have historically been difficult to get to. We've shown a few times that enforcement is actually able to disrupt them even when they're not in sort of extradition partner type countries, especially through seizing or disruption of their digital assets. So I do think there's a mindset shift there of spending at least as much on enforcement and again inflicting pain and cost to that economic model or even geopolitical model as there is in setting standards and frameworks and reasonable levels of penalty for a failure to exercise kind of basic fiduciary duty, right? We as citizens, to be frank, would love to go out and do the call of like every time you don't update your iOS when the iPhone tells you to, and you don't want to do it because you still want to be on, your social media, stop and do it. That is a patch. It may be code problems, but it probably also is a security patch that they're deploying. So before you start pointing at these companies, they weren't patched. They didn't, change their passwords to hard passwords. Look to yourself first. And we're all global citizens in this fight. And I do think we all have a certain amount of responsibility and accountability to educate ourselves, to feel accountable for our contribution to this broader challenge. And frankly, if we all fortify a little bit, again, we just make it that much harder for them to make money off of this.
I agree. I guess that's funny because from the incident response, a commander position of some of our largest engagements, you do see a recurring theme of some of this was predictable, and some of it was you. I don't think it was. Like I agree with you 100%. You don't want to blame the victim, and we're taking some of the onus away from the people who are victimizing it. But by the same token, if you have an alarm on your bank, but you don't lock the vault and you don't set the alarm, do you bear some responsibility of
Your car
letting?
gets stolen, you left the keys in it.
Yeah, exactly. So I do think there's a fair balance in that. There's another component of this that I'd like to get your take on. So Jen Easterly, former CISA head. I know you know Jen. I worked with her in the Army.
Amazing. Yes.
She was very big of pushing forward the idea of secure software development.
Yes.
And was very instrumental in pushing that forward. And I'm a huge believer in this, by the way, because I've actually seen sort of from the inside what it means when you're not developing secure code. And so the question becomes to you: do you believe? I mean, you were a software developer at one time. You had a software company. So the question becomes, what's your take on that? Secure by design methodology. The idea that software vendors owe it to their customers to be more secure in their development.
I think Jen was onto something fundamental, right? That's all about root cause analysis. Somehow we all got slow boiled into thinking it was normal to have a day where we patched everything.
Yeah.
And, to have, even at Secureworks, we always had a backlog of new emerging vulnerabilities that we needed to prioritize in our engineering stack against, a platform that was securing customers. And so how do you allocate those resources in a way that makes sense? Well, better yet, we would have code that was secure by design and not have to create that workload or that externality, frankly, that they're creating on their customers as opposed to taking on that cost themselves. And so she viewed the rightful role of government to be making the sources of those externalities pay for those externalities. And so we signed up to that from day one and created the transparency and disclosures around our own software development for our customers accordingly. Because you can't have finger pointing without being accountable yourself. As you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of at least a third of successful breaches come from unpatched software vulnerabilities, and to say that it is just the work of the end companies to fix that is, I think, an unfair transfer of responsibility.
So I'd like to pivot a little bit to sort of some social areas, if you don't mind. We've talked sort of around it. Well, I know one of the things that you're really big on the supporting is in diversity and technology. Bringing more young females into the tech world, et cetera. And I sat back and I was thinking of this, and I'm just going to name like you. Sue Lawrence, Jennifer Napper, Claire Cuccio, Maureen O'Connor, Alison Wyckoff, Alexander Rose, Rebecca Taylor. I'm naming females who I have personally worked for or with, who have been, brilliant and have taught me more than I will ever be able to repay. And I'm thinking of that, like, it doesn't seem like it's the boys club of 20 years ago anymore. Are we making progress in your opinion? It seems like we got a lot of very influential folks that are now representing areas that we thought were not representative enough. Are we making progress?
Well, I mean, if you just look at the numbers, we have made a lot of progress in the last decade in particular. And a career is not built in a day, right? You don't show up after you graduate from college and you're ready to be in the C-suite. So this is a slow build, if you will, but we are seeing that the numbers very much improved from where they were in terms of the mix of representation in the workforce. What it isn't is representative of the population mix yet, right? Whether that's gender or race or what have you. And generally, that was always, when give or take, when you would say this is normalized, right? None of that matters. It's just merit that's bringing you in. And there are no barriers to entry or barriers to progress, when generally your workforce reflects the broader population. So we're not there on that front, and I do think that there are still unique things that women need to hear in particular, and I'll just speak to that because of my own experience. We are still the ones who have children. So we have unique things about different stages of our career that matter and are different, and balancing that is still something that, just like you seek out advice for, if you want to learn to be a great tennis player, right? You seek out coaching and advice of the pitfalls and the tricks of the trade. I still think there's value in having those kinds of conversations with young women, mid-career women, and that's why I'm always happy to do that, and pay it forward to the many men and women who did that for me over the years.
Are there organizations that sort of fit in that mold, that if a young people, young females, young folks coming from disadvantaged groups can access that level of mentor-mentee kind of relationship? Are there organizations that folks can look to?
Sure. Now, I am, I've always been a big believer in reading things by Catalyst. It's been a tremendous organization for just understanding trends for women in the workplace and knowing you're not alone. But that's not kind of one-to-one mentorship, if you will. Those tend to be more local. Like, I do believe in the power of doing that in person. For me, I've always been involved in the Technology Association of Georgia, and there's a chapter that actually spun off called Women in Technology in Atlanta, which is where I've lived the last 20 plus years. That was a huge thing for me in terms of mentorship. So unfortunately, I can't say there's just 3 orgs nationally that you can go to, but I would look for those kinds of organizations where women gather locally. And here's the thing, when you meet someone and there's that connection, don't just kind of walk up, hey, well, you want to be my mentor, but you meet someone and there is that connection, just follow up. Just follow up right away with an email, a text, a LinkedIn invite, what have you. I have very rarely found someone who will not respond yes to a request for a one-on-one if they have met you and felt that initial connection. And those relationships then turn into three more introductions. That happened with me and a young woman from Emory a couple weeks ago. That is the real power of creating your own sort of personalized network that is natural and works for you in the long run.
Outstanding, as always. Sound advice. A couple of more items before I let you go. I know I'm abusing your time here, but I'm gonna
For
eat
you,
out the
Terry.
full hour, Wendy. Um, so two final questions. Not really related, but tangential. The first question is, um, I personally, I'll frame my bias. I have been very down on higher education and its value for the dollar spent, and that I don't it personally, as the leader of my own organization, don't use it necessarily as a delineation for whom I consider qualified. And nor do I think it's sound advice to just tell every kid that they need to go to college. What's your take on this? Certification, hands-on degree, self-learning versus the higher education. Are you still? Where do you fall on that debate?
Well, my bias toward outcomes over activity.
Mhm.
And we've had plenty of brilliant, successful folks at Secureworks, now at Sophos, who didn't have a college degree, had a non-traditional, or they had one, but it was in literature.
Right.
They had a non-traditional background, one might say. I came from a degree in economics and foreign affairs and finance. So the kind of intellectual curiosity, work ethic, all of those things matter in the long run much more, because what you study in college today, what people studied 10 years ago, like there's fields that didn't exist when you and I went to college.
Mhm.
So it's really about that continuous ability and desire to learn and apply that learning. And I think certifications, frankly, online learning. I was a big Khan Academy fan,
Mhm.
years ago. Where why do
I
you have to
still
sit in
am.
the classroom, right? I mean, so it's very uh, not of our time to think that there's only one way to learn. I do think that for an executive type role, the sort of Socratic debate and interaction that you often get in universities, not always, but that I certainly did, is an important part of the learning, and you can't get that as well online, if you will. And that relationship building, as you know, whether you're in an incident, or you're trying to turn a prospect into a customer, building a relationship and building trust is fundamental to both to business, right, and to operating. And so how do you create the opportunities to learn that? 80% of your learning is on the job. I think that's been proven again and again, maybe 70 to 80 in every single study. So we've used that college degree as a heuristic for, well, if they got into this school and they studied that hard major or that specialized major, then they're sort of they've gotten through a couple of gates that we don't have the accountability to check. It takes a little more to get to know someone than to just look at a piece of paper and say they check these boxes already. So I understand that, but it's kind of the easy way, not necessarily the right way. And I would say with again the ability to have people write something, take some sort of coding test, you name it, you can figure out their ability to drive outcomes, rather than just using a sort of shortcut box checking exercise with a very now increasingly expensive college degree. Maybe they go later, right? Maybe that's the right answer later. But right now, let's get some job experience and life experience and figure out what the right path.
Yeah, I think the models need to adapt. I mean, for the money, I find it's crushingly expensive for the value that one gets coming out of it. I mean, like the kids exiting with 40, 70, $100,000 in debt, to get a job that pays 30. It's just not or drive DoorDash, right? I mean, it's not a it's not. I think we need to relook the model, just like I think we need to relook the model of kids sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day in elementary school to try to do rote memorization. I mean, we have ubiquitous access to information, mostly ubiquitous. I think it's probably unfair to say everyone has equal access, but largely we have an ever-present access to information that wasn't there. I used the Dewey Decimal System when I was getting my first master's degree. I mean, this is like I was in a library looking for tech. Yeah. So I do think that we do need to rethink sort of how we learn, because kids are doing it whether we want them to or not. And I don't know if it's I would rather have them guided in that enterprise than unguided. But so pivoting to the last one, and this is for you were successfully, you came out of corporate finance. You moved into I think tech would be a good way to say it. You became a leader in tech, not only financially but in program and product management, and then as chief executive officer. So you've seen sort of the gamut of phases in that corporate world, from being publicly traded and privately held. But you took a company from privately held, you went public. Yeah, you went from public to acquisition. In that scheme of maneuver, what were some of the surprises that you learned that kind of like your moments that I wish I'd known that 5 years ago. So as part of that lessons learned.
Sure. So I'd say a few things that I used this phrase before. You have to prepare for the pace of change and the need to help people through that pace of change. It's like preparing for a marathon, not a 5K. It's a lifestyle, not a project. I use that phrase because your expectations matter a lot. If you go to buy some tickets to a concert and you expect a long wait time, you kind of like, okay, it's only 50 minutes instead of an hour. Great. But if you go in expecting it to be done in 30 seconds, you're incredibly frustrated and worn out by the time you're done, waiting in the queue for the ability to buy your tickets. And that's a really important leadership lesson, because sometimes you mentioned, different capital structures, because we had it all at Secureworks. We were private. We were bought by Dell. We spun out public, and then went private. So when you lay those out as goals as opposed to enablement, you've got to set the right goals that people are bought into, goals where there are surges, and kind of like Kipchoge when he ran the sub 2 hour marathon. The way that he did that, right? And if you think of him as the CEO, was there were pace setters who kept moving into the front and then moving to the back. And so if you think about an organization as a team that has a shared goal of running this marathon in sub 2 hours, so they're running at this incredible pace, but it's a shared load, and there's a high say-do ratio. They're all accountable to the end mission, but some people get to, pull back, and some push forward to get what needs to be done now for the overall success of the team. To me, that is watching that happen well, or watching it not happen well, where you burn people out, was probably the most powerful leadership lesson that I had from the amount of change that Secureworks went through. Set your goals carefully and plan to run the race as a team.
Yeah, I have a friend, a mutual friend, Mike Carter, and his equation was frustration is the sum of expectations minus reality. That you can judge your frustration level based on how well you as a leader set an expectation away from reality. Like, so your goals have to be articulated in a way that they're also attainable but understood and bought into, and that includes customer service relations as well. And I mean, good Lord, I think at your high point you had almost 5,000 customers that you had to please at any one given time. Lessons learned from that. Are there leadership strategies or managerial strategies that you took from having so many folks that you had to manage at one time? Customer.
They should know you before their moment of crisis. That's probably the most powerful. Now, is that realistic in all cases? No, but being incredibly, so that helps a ton, right? So that's not you get a little benefit of the doubt. It's not the first conversation you're having when you need to get on the phone with their board to help them through a situation. But the other one is just to be incredibly responsive, even when you don't know the answer. That's true for your team. It's true for your customers. And that can be really hard because you kind of say, well, I'm a leader. I should have all the answers. I should, be able to articulate that very clearly. And you do have to, half the battle is just showing up. You have to show up. You have to say clearly what you do know. But here's what you don't know that you need to, you need to know. Mm-hmm. And you are actively working to get that answer. And here's how you're doing that. But if you don't show up, people will assume the worst. And that couldn't be more true in any type of customer service relationship, but it's particularly true when people are in the heat of an incident and they need to trust that you're kind of with them 24/7 until that issue is resolved. And like I said, trust is it's what makes the world go round.
So last of the business questions. So I know from personal experience, you are a very data-driven person. You like to have data-informed discussions. And if you come with the wrong data, be prepared for a really bad day with the CEO. But there is also the 80-20 rule. I think the Colin Powell famous, like you're never going to have perfect information. So when do you decide is good enough? So how does Wendy Thomas decide, when is enough data enough to make the right decision without spending too much time in analysis paralysis? Where is that inflection point for you? Or can you even articulate that?
Yeah, to me, it is all about the points of leverage in the business. And so part of the way you get around that is if you don't have a piece of data, you can take a couple of approaches. Well, what if the number was a range between this and this? Does it matter? Does it change the decision? Right. So that's one way to kind of say, okay, then that's not a point of leverage. The other one is you want to get here. You don't have a lot of data. We clearly didn't know everything in the world when we went to go build a security platform, and nobody knew what the heck that was going to look like. I like to turn the question around and say, what do you have to believe? What do you have to believe to take a services company for 20 plus years and think it can build world-class security software in the cloud? What has to be in place for that to be successful? And so I often find that what do you have to believe that passes the smell test of assumptions or reasonable execution tends to, again, get you focused on the things that matter and let go of the things that simply don't move the needle. They're just extraneous detail.
That's excellent advice, by the way. And we know from empirical evidence that it actually works because you've successfully navigated all the above. So congratulations, by the way.
I did it with a great team.
And it is a great team. But part of, I think, being a leader is assembling a great team, right? We have a mutual acquaintance that said that Wendy is unique as a leader because given 2 weeks, she'll probably know the job better than you. Even if she didn't know it before. And you've proven that you have an exceptional ability to sort of take in data, even from stuff that wasn't your areas of expertise, and become an expert. And so that's a laudable quality. So, but you did build an amazing team, and I'm glad to see it's all paid off well for you. Any bits of advice that you want to, I feel like I drove this conversation, but are there things that you wanted to talk about that we didn't hit in the last couple seconds?
Well, Terry, yeah, I get to brag on you a little bit because not only have you become a CEO, and you and I have had so many conversations over the year about life and career and family, that you've not only become a CEO, but you're a founder CEO. So you have
Yep.
surpassed, and I am so thrilled and excited for what you're doing for an area in the market like that needs solving. It is a real pain point, and
it is true. It has been, and I consider you a friend and a mentor for lots of reasons. It is interesting to see that we went from zero to multi-million dollars in the first year. So it's not like this wasn't but it is also about assembling the right team. It is surrounding yourself with people who have expertise in areas and strengths that you don't have, and being humble enough to recognize that. I think a lot of leaders fall into this idea that they have to be the ultimate, and I learned very early on that really successful leaders are successful because they don't need to be there. You pick the people who are good to operate independently because you've hired them for their strengths. If you need to be there, you probably aren't doing the leadership job you thought you were, right? So I do
Yeah,
think
you
that that's
set the
important.
mission and the guiding principles against which you want to execute that mission, and then you get a team highly aligned and then loosely coupled, and they
And then
run
make it
with
happen.
it, they own it, and that's why I used to call myself the great galvanizer, because that's really what I was doing, was galvanizing a great team.
And you have a strong fan club. So I appreciate all the time and the mentorship you've given me, and you continue to give me, and I appreciate you doing this as well, and all your guidance. And if we can ever reciprocate, we'll be happy to do so.
My pleasure. It's so good to see you.